I was born in a small town on the bank of the Tiber, a few days' journey from Rome itself. My father was a free citizen, not a rich man, of course, but not a pauper either. He owned a small workshop where he mended clay pottery and made amphorae for wine. My mother managed the household, baked bread, and wove fabrics. We lived in a two-room house with an earthen floor and a tiled roof. For our social class, this was quite a respectable dwelling. On the 9th day after my birth, my father hosted a small family celebration. This was an important moment. It was then that I officially received my name and became a recognized member of the family. My father lifted me in his arms before the household altar, where incense was burning in honor of the Lares, our domestic guardian spirits. He spoke my name aloud, Marcus Valerius Maximus. Marcus, a personal name that my grandfather wore with pride. Valerius, the clan name of our family, albeit not the most distinguished. And Maximus, a cognomen, meaning the greatest, although in our family it was more of a tradition than a reflection of real merit. From that day, I was a citizen of Rome. Yes, merely an infant, but already a citizen, with rights that were denied to millions of people across the empire. Slaves, barbarians, inhabitants of conquered lands could only dream of the status I received by birth. My father often repeated, "You were born free, son. Protect that." My childhood was typical for a boy from a middle-income family. My neighbors' boys and I ran through the narrow streets, playing soldiers with wooden swords and spears that we crafted ourselves from branches. We especially loved depicting great battles. Sometimes we were Caesar's legionaries in Gaul, sometimes Scipio's warriors who defeated Hannibal. Of course, none of us truly understood who these generals were or where those distant lands were located, but their names sounded magical. I remember once we built a fortress out of old boxes and boards in a vacant lot behind the house. I commanded the defense, and my friend Gaius led the attacking barbarians. We got so carried away that we didn't notice my grandfather, an old Legion veteran, had approached and was silently watching us. When we, breathless, finally stopped, he smiled and said, "In a real battle, boys, a fortress is built in one night and held until the last man, and no one shouts like market women." Grandfather was a living legend to me. He served 25 years in the legions, went through Germania and Britannia, and saw the ocean at the end of the world. His body was covered in scars, a long sword mark on his forearm, an arrow scar on his thigh, a strange dent on his skull where a barbarian club had nearly finished him off. He rarely spoke of war, but when he started, everyone in the house froze and listened. I especially remember one winter evening. We were sitting by the hearth, the logs crackling, my mother mending clothes, and I, a 7-year-old boy, couldn't take my eyes off my grandfather. He looked into the fire and quietly told us how his legion marched through the dense German forests, where the trees stood so close that the sun couldn't penetrate the crowns. How they built a camp every evening, surrounding it with a palisade and a ditch, because the barbarians could attack at any moment. How one night the Germans actually attacked, and he, still a young soldier, killed a man for the first time. "It's not like your games, Marcus," grandfather said, looking at me. "When you see the eyes of the man you are about to kill, when you feel your sword enter his body and he screams and rattles, it changes you forever. But a legionary must be able to do this. Otherwise, he is dead." I didn't fully understand his words then, but they settled deep in my memory. From that evening on, war stopped seeming like a game to me. When I turned 8 years old, Father decided it was time for me to start learning. Of course, not at an expensive school where the children of the wealthy studied. That was beyond our means. But an old scholar named Lucius lived in our town, who, for a small fee, taught children to read, write, and count. Every morning, I went to him with a wax tablet and a stylus, a sharp writing stick. Lucius was a strict teacher. For the slightest mistake or inattention, he would hit my fingers with a ruler. not hard, but painfully. Without literacy, you will remain nobody, he would say. Even in the army, a literate soldier is valued higher. He can become a scribe, an assistant centurion, or be relieved of heavy duties. I learned to read from old scrolls that Lucius had somehow acquired, stories about ancient heroes, about Romulus and Remus, who founded Rome, about brave consuls and generals. Gradually, the vast world of my people's past opened up to me. I learned that Rome started as a small settlement on 7 hills, that our ancestors fought neighbors for centuries, that the Republic was conquered not by the power of the gods, but by the power of discipline and order. I was especially struck by the story of how an entire legion was once punished by decimation. Every 10th soldier was beaten to death by his own comrades for cowardice in battle. It seemed cruel, but Lucius explained, "A legion is not just a crowd of men with swords. It is an organism where everyone depends on everyone else. If one man falters, everyone dies. Therefore, discipline in the army is paramount." By 12 years old, I could read and write reasonably well, could count money, and keep simple records. Physically, I had also grown stronger. Father sometimes took me to the workshop where I carried heavy amphorae and kneaded clay. It was hard work, but it tempered the body. More and more often, I started thinking about the future. Should I continue my father's business? Become a craftsman, a merchant, perhaps a scribe in some office? These paths were safe, understandable. But every time I saw legionaries marching through our town in their gleaming armor, when I heard my grandfather's stories, when I recalled tales of great battles, something ignited inside me. I wanted to become a legionary. I wanted to see the world beyond our small town. I wanted to test myself, to become part of something great and eternal. Rome had stood for centuries. Its legions were invincible, and I dreamed of joining their ranks, touching that power, becoming a part of it. Of course, I did not yet know the price of all this. I did not know that service in the legions meant 25 years of life dedicated to the empire, that it meant blood, sweat, pain, lost friends, and scars that would remain forever. But a boy of 12 years old sees only the shine, only the glory, only the dream. And this dream was now firmly entrenched in my head. When I turned 16, Father announced that it was time to don the toga of a grown man. This was the most important day in the life of any Roman youth, the transition from childhood to adulthood. That morning, Mother washed me, and Father solemnly removed the childish toga with the purple border from my shoulders and dressed me in the snow-white toga worn by all free citizens of Rome. We went to the temple in the Forum, where I was supposed to make a sacrifice to the gods, a few copper coins and a wreath of laurel leaves. I remember how nervous I was, standing before the altar, feeling the gazes of other townsfolk upon me. From that moment on, I was no longer a boy. I became a full citizen, capable of voting in assemblies, making deals, getting married, and serving in the legions. True, there wasn't much for me to vote on. We lived far from the capital, and in our town, all decisions were made by the local wealthy people. Marriage also seemed distant. How could I support a family? But service in the legions, that was real and beckoned ever stronger. After the ceremony, Grandfather took me aside and simply said, "Now you are a man, Marcus. That means it is time to become stronger." From that day on, he began training me just as he had been trained once in the legions. Every morning, before dawn, we would get up and head out of town to the vacant lot by the river. There, Grandfather forced me to run, first briefly, then longer and longer. Then he handed me a heavy sack of sand and ordered me to carry it on my shoulders, do lunges, and squats. "In the Legion, you will carry all your equipment on you," he explained. Armor, shield, sword, spears, shovel, axe, mess kit, food reserve. All together, more than 30 kilograms. And with that, you will march 30 kilometers a day. So, get used to it. The first weeks were hell. My entire body ached, my muscles burned with fire, I could barely get out of bed, but gradually my body began to change. My shoulders widened, my arms became sinewy and strong, and my breathing stopped becoming ragged when running. Grandfather taught me to handle a wooden sword, not just waving it around like in children's games, but hitting accurately and quickly, aiming for vital points. A legionary doesn't fight beautifully, he said. He kills quickly and effectively. One blow, and the enemy is dead. Parallel to physical training, I continued to study. By that time, I read quite well, and old Lucius gave me scrolls detailing great Roman victories. I learned about Hannibal, who nearly destroyed Rome but was defeated at Zama, about Julius Caesar, who conquered Gaul and crossed the ocean into Britannia, about triumphs and defeats, about how the legions of Rome subdued the entire known world, step by step. These stories ignited my imagination. I imagined myself in the ranks of the legion, marching through distant lands, fighting savage tribes, returning home a hero. But my family viewed my dreams differently. One evening when I was 17, Father sat me down at the table and spoke seriously about the future. "You are almost a grown man, Marcus," he began. "It's time to decide what you will do. I can teach you my trade. Pottery is not the most profitable work, but it is stable. There will always be a demand for amphorae and pottery. Or if you want, you can try your hand at trade. I have acquaintances who can help you start." Mother quietly added, "Or you can become a scribe. You are literate. You know how to count. The city administration always needs people like that. Clean work, without dirt or risk." I remained silent, twisting a piece of bread in my hands. These options were sensible, safe, but something inside me protested. Would my whole life really pass in this small town? Would I really continue making pots or rewriting tax lists until old age? "What about the legions?" I finally asked. Father frowned. Mother turned pale. Grandfather, sitting in the corner, smirked but said nothing. "The legions are not a game, son," Father said slowly. "It is 25 years of service. You could die in the first battle. You could return crippled. You might not return at all. They will send you to the edge of the world, to Britannia or Syria, and we will never see you again." "But if I survive," I countered, feeling my heart pound, "I will receive a land grant after service. I will become a veteran. I will be respected. I will be able to build a real house, start a farm." Father sighed. "If you survive. If you don't go crazy from what you see. If you don't drink yourself to death or catch a fever in some swamp." Mother quietly wept. I felt a pang of guilt, but my resolve did not weaken. It wasn't just about the land grant or romantic ideas of war. There was another reason I didn't want to speak aloud. Our family lacked money. Father's workshop barely fed us. My younger brothers were growing up. They also needed something to live on. If I stayed, I would be an extra mouth to feed. But in the legions, they paid a salary, small but regular. I could send part of that money home to help the family. "I want to serve," I said firmly. "I am ready." Father stared at me for a long time, then turned to Grandfather. "Tell him, Father. Tell him what true service is like." Grandfather stood up, walked over to me, and placed a heavy hand on my shoulder. "Service in the legions is the hardest work you can imagine, Marcus. You will dig the earth until your hands bleed and blister, march to exhaustion, freeze in the German forests, and suffocate from the heat in the eastern deserts. You will be beaten for the slightest transgression, your comrades will die in your arms, and your commanders will treat you worse than a pack animal." He paused, looking directly into my eyes. "But if you endure, if you become a true legionary, you will belong to the greatest military force the world has ever seen. You will become part of what makes Rome Rome, and no one can ever take that pride away from you. Never." His words decided everything. I nodded. Father sighed and lowered his head. Mother continued to weep quietly. But the decision was made. I spent the next months in intensive preparation. Grandfather trained me even more harshly. Now it was not just exercise, but true preparation for actual service. I learned what true discipline was, what it meant to endure pain and fatigue, and what absolute obedience to an order was. When I turned 18, I was ready. My body was strong. My spirit was tempered. I knew that something terrible and wonderful simultaneously awaited me. But it was too late to back down, and I didn't want to back down. The recruitment commission arrived in our town in the spring. I remember that day in detail. Bright sun, dust on the road, the clatter of hooves and the clang of iron. A small detachment of legionaries led by an officer set up in the forum, installing tables and standards. People flocked to see, some out of curiosity, some hoping to send their sons into service, some just to gawk at real soldiers. I arrived early in the morning, but a queue of applicants had already formed before me, 20 men at least. Most were from families as poor as ours. Some clearly came out of desperation, others in search of adventure, like me. We stood for a long time under the blazing sun while the officers leisurely processed the paperwork and checked the previous candidates. Finally, it was my turn. The chief recruiter, a gray-haired centurion with a scar-etched face, looked me over with an evaluating gaze. "Name?" he asked curtly. I gave my name. The scribe recorded my details on a wax tablet. "Confirm your citizenship," the centurion commanded. I pulled out the copper tag that Father had given me before I left home, proof that I was a freeborn Roman citizen. Only citizens could serve in the legions. Barbarians, freedmen, slaves. The path to the ranks was closed to them. The centurion carefully examined the tag, checked it against the records, and nodded. "Strip," he commanded. I pulled off my tunic, remaining practically naked before the crowd of onlookers. It was awkward, but everyone else went through it, so I gritted my teeth and kept silent. The centurion walked around me, feeling my shoulders, arms, and back, checking for any deformities or serious injuries. Then he told me to open my mouth, checking my teeth like cattle at a market. Then he ordered me to jump, squat, and run a little. "Height is suitable," he grunted. I was indeed tall for my age. Grandfather said that the legions took men no shorter than 175 centimeters. Short men were not taken. A short soldier fights less effectively in formation, cannot reach the enemy, and creates a weak spot in the phalanx. "Do you see well?" the centurion asked, pointing to a distant tree. I nodded. My eyesight was sharp. "Literate?" I nodded again. The centurion hummed in surprise. There were few literate men among the recruits. This could work in my favor in the future. "Fit," he finally announced. "Come tomorrow for the oath." My heart was pounding wildly as I returned home. Everything was decided. There was no turning back. That evening, Father silently embraced me. Mother cried again, stuffing a spare tunic and bread wrapped in cloth into my travel sack. Grandfather took out his old military belt and handed it to me. "Wore it for 25 years, he said hoarsely. "May it serve you too." The next day, I returned to the forum along with the rest of the selected men. There were about 15 of us from our town. We were lined up in front of the Legion's standards. The standards were sacred, a golden eagle on a pole, adorned with wreaths and medals. Legend held that losing the Legion's standard was a disgrace worse than death, and the soldiers were ready to die defending it. The centurion read the oath. We repeated after him, word for word. I remember these words still. I swore to serve the Roman people, the Senate, and the Emperor faithfully, to obey the orders of the commanders, not to desert, not to retreat without command, and to protect my comrades and the standards of the Legion with my life. I swore to serve until the end of the term, 25 years, or until death. When the last word of the oath escaped my lips, I felt a strange mixture of pride and fear. Now I belonged to the legions. Now I was a soldier of Rome. After the ceremony, we were taken to a table where we received our first pay, a small pouch with a few silver coins. This was an advance, from which the cost of future equipment and provisions was immediately deducted. Very little remained in my hands, but even these crumbs were riches to me. I immediately gave a portion of the money to my father, let him buy something for the family. Then the most unpleasant part began. The scribe told me to hold out my arm. I didn't immediately understand why until I saw the hot iron in the assistant's hands. The Legion's brand, the scribe explained, so that if you desert, everyone will know who you are. The hot metal touched my forearm. The pain was so sharp that I barely held back a scream. The smell of burning flesh made me shut my eyes. When the iron was removed, a clear mark, the Legion's designation, remained on my skin. Now I would wear this mark until death. That evening we were gathered and introduced to our centurion, the man who would command our century. His name was Lucius Cornelius Severus, a tall, sinewy man of about 40 years old with cold gray eyes and a voice that made one shiver. On his belt hung a vine staff, the symbol of a centurion's authority and an instrument of punishment. With this vine staff, he could beat soldiers for any transgression. "Listen carefully, newcomers," Severus began, pacing in front of us. "From this minute on, you are not men. You are not even soldiers. You are the dirt under my boots until you prove otherwise. You will do what I order, when I order it, without questions or second thoughts. If I say dig, you will dig until death. If I say run, you will run until you drop. And if I say die, you will die with gratitude that I have given you such an honor." He stopped, looking at us with contempt. "Many of you will not survive the training. Some will drop dead from fatigue. Some will desert, and then they will be found, dragged back, and stoned to death in front of the formation. Some will simply realize they are not cut out for this, and will be driven out in disgrace. And those who survive will become legionaries. Maybe." We were divided into contubernia, groups of 8 men who would live, eat, and fight together. My comrades were 7 strangers, a guy named Gnaeus from the neighboring village, the brothers Publius and Quintus, a silent giant named Titus, 2 skinny boys whose names I immediately forgot, and the oldest among us, 20-year-old Marcius, who had already served 1 year in another unit and had been transferred to us. Marcius immediately took on the role of the senior man. "Listen to me, pups," he said when we settled into the barracks. "Things here are not as you imagined. Centurions will beat you just because, for prophylaxis. Old-timers will bully you and steal your food. If you show weakness, you'll be trampled. Stick together, cover each other, don't complain, and don't cry. Otherwise, you won't survive." That night, I barely slept. I lay on the hard wooden bunk, listening to my comrades snore, and thought, what have I done? Just yesterday, I was safe at home with my family, and now I was here, in this cold barracks, among strangers, under the rule of cruel commanders, and years of this hell lay ahead. But in the morning, when the bugles sounded, rousing us before dawn, when the centurion roared for us to line up on the parade ground, when the first training session began, I realized one thing: there was no turning back. Now there was only one path, forward, through pain and exhaustion, through fear and despair. I had become a legionary, and now I had to remain one. The first day of training began long before dawn. I was still asleep when Centurion Severus burst into the barracks and started hitting the bunks with his vine staff, shouting for us to get up. We jumped up in a panic, stumbling over each other in the dark, trying to put on our tunics. Someone wasn't fast enough. Severus slammed the vine staff across his back so hard that he howled with pain. "To the parade ground, move it!" the centurion roared. We ran outside. It was still dark. The cold pre-dawn wind chilled us to the bone. Other recruits were already lined up on the parade ground, about 100 men at least. Everyone was shivering from cold and fear. Severus walked in front of the formation, his vine staff tapping against his leg. "Today you will begin transforming from pathetic civilians into legionaries," he announced. "It will be painful. It will be hard. Many of you will want to run away. Try it, and I will personally ensure you are found and executed. And now, run." We ran. I don't know how many laps around the camp we did. I lost count. We ran until our legs turned to lead, until the pain in our sides made every breath a torture, until several men collapsed, gasping. Severus didn't stop. He raised the fallen with strikes of the vine staff and drove them onward. When we were finally allowed to stop, the sun had already risen above the horizon. I doubled over, panting, covered in sweat. Next to me, Gnaeus from my contubernium was throwing up in the grass. One of the skinny boys lay unconscious. He was dragged aside and had a bucket of water poured over his head. "Breakfast in a half hour," Severus announced. "Then, weapons." Breakfast was meager. A piece of stale bread, a little porridge, and watered-down sour wine. We ate in silence, too tired to talk. Marcius, the senior man in our contubernium, quietly said, "Get used to it. This is still an easy day." After breakfast, we were taken to the training ground. There stood wooden poles, sunk into the earth, thick ones, the height of a man. Next to them lay wooden swords and woven shields, much heavier than the real ones. "These posts are your enemies," explained the instructor, an old veteran named Appius. "You will hit them until you learn to kill with one blow. A legionary's sword is short, thrusting. We do not slash like barbarians. We thrust, quickly, accurately, into vital spots. A blow to the throat, under the ribs, into the groin. The enemy must fall on the first try." He demonstrated the basic stance, left foot forward, shield covering the body from the chin to the knees, sword in the right hand ready to strike. "The shield is your life," he said. "Without a shield, you are dead. Hold it tightly. Don't drop it. Cover the comrade next to you. In formation, you are one whole. Shields must be a wall." We began training. The wooden sword was awkward and heavy. It weighed twice as much as a real gladius. This was done deliberately to strengthen the arm. The shield was also heavier than usual. I struck the post again and again, a lunge forward, a thrust, a return to position. Appius walked among us, correcting stances, shouting at us to hit harder, more accurately. "Don't wave the sword like a stick. Thrust, stab," he roared. "In battle you won't get a second chance. One mistake, and you're a corpse." After an hour, my arm went numb. The shield felt as heavy as a lead plate. But stopping was forbidden. Appius hit anyone who relaxed or lost concentration with the vine staff. By lunchtime, I could barely stand. In the afternoon, we were taught how to use the pilum, a heavy throwing spear. The pilum was cleverly designed, a long iron head on a wooden shaft. When the spear stuck into an enemy's shield, the iron shaft bent, making the shield useless. The opponent was forced to drop the shield, becoming an easy target. We threw pila at wooden targets. The throw required strength and accuracy. The spear was heavy, clumsy. My first throws flew wide or fell short. Appius came over, showed the correct technique, a run-up, a wind-up, the entire body's force in the throw. Gradually, I started to succeed. In the evening, when we thought we would finally rest, the hardest part began. We were lined up in a column, given full gear, shield, spears, shovel, axe, a sack of sand instead of marching equipment, and driven into a forced march. 30 kilometers in 5 hours, Severus announced. That is the legionary standard. If you don't meet it, you will go without dinner and sleep outside. We moved out. The first kilometers were tolerable. Then our legs started burning, our shoulders ached under the weight of the gear, and our breathing broke rhythm. The shield dug into my back. The spears snagged on everything. Someone started lagging behind. Severus drove the stragglers, not letting them stop for a second. I marched, focused on the back of the man ahead, step by step, not thinking about the pain, not thinking about the fatigue, just walking. Next to me, Titus, the giant from our contubernium, was breathing heavily. Behind me, someone groaned and collapsed. The centurion stopped, lifted him with a kick, and forced him to continue. When we finally returned to the camp, it was already dark. We made the time limit, barely, but we made it. I collapsed onto the ground, unable to move. My entire body was one solid ache. My hands were shaking. I couldn't feel my legs. Dinner was meager again. I ate mechanically, not noticing the taste. Then we returned to the barracks. I fell onto the bunk and almost immediately drifted into sleep. But even in my sleep, I continued to march. Days passed like this, one after another. Wake up before dawn, running, training with sword and shield, throwing spears, drill training, forced marches. The same thing every day until exhaustion. For the slightest mistake, a blow from the vine staff. For failure to obey an order, loss of rations. For a serious transgression, public flogging. One day a recruit tried to run away. He was caught the next day. They brought him back to the camp and flogged him in front of the formation so severely that his back turned into a bloody mess. Then they chained him to a post for 3 days without food or water. When they took him down, he could no longer walk. No one tried to desert again. Gradually, I began to change. My body became stronger, sinewy, resilient. My hands got used to the weight of the sword and shield. My legs stopped aching after forced marches. I learned to sleep anywhere, eat anything, and endure pain and fatigue. I learned to act automatically without thinking, hear the order, execute it. But the main thing, I began to feel a connection with my contubernium, 8 men who were going through the same hell. We shared everything: food, shelter, pain, fear. When Gnaeus couldn't get up after an especially tough training session, we helped him reach the barracks. When the centurion took Publius's ration for slowness, we shared ours. When Titus received a heavy blow from the vine staff and thought he couldn't handle it, we supported him. Marcius said, "The contubernium is your family now. These people will cover you in battle. You will live for them, you will die for them. If one is weak, all are weak. If one is strong, all are strong." After several months, training and formation maneuvers began. We were taught to form up in battle order, dense rows of shields, spears held forward. We learned to move as a unified organism, turning, reforming on command. This was harder than it seemed. One wrong step, and the entire formation broke. The commands were managed by buglers. Different signals meant different actions: advance, retreat, turn, change rows. We memorized these signals instantly, reacting immediately. In the chaos of battle, there would be no time to think, only to hear and act. One day, we were made to build a training camp, just like on a real campaign. We dug a ditch around the perimeter, built an embankment, and set up a palisade of sharpened stakes. We worked all day, without a break. Our hands bled, our backs ached, but the camp was built by evening. Appius said, "On a campaign, you will do this every evening, after a day's march. If you don't build fortifications, the barbarians will cut you down tonight." By the end of the first year of training, I was no longer the boy who came to the recruitment. I had become a soldier. I learned to kill wooden posts with cold efficiency. I learned to march under any load. I learned to endure and survive. But most importantly, I found brothers. 7 men with whom I had gone through this hell and was ready to go further, into real war. And the war did not keep us waiting. Chapter 5. The First Campaign and Baptism by Fire. The order to march came in the spring of my 2nd year of service. German tribes had once again raised a revolt on the border, and our legion was being sent to the Rhine to subdue the rebellious barbarians. This news spread through the camp instantly. Who rejoiced? Finally, real war, not endless training. Some turned pale, realizing that everything would soon become real. I felt a strange mixture of excitement and fear. A year of training, it seemed, had prepared me for everything. But somewhere deep down sat a chill of doubt. Was I ready to kill a living person? Was I ready to die myself? The march to the border took several weeks. We moved in a column, stretched out for several kilometers. 6,000 legionaries plus auxiliary troops, supply wagons, engineers. Every soldier carried his full gear: armor, shield, 2 pila, sword, dagger, shovel, axe, saw, basket for earth, rope, mess kit, 3 days of provisions. All of this weighed more than 30 kilograms. The first days of the march were difficult. Despite the training, by evening our legs ached and our shoulders were rubbed raw by the straps. But gradually, the body settled into a rhythm, step by step, hour by hour. The centurions set the pace, not allowing us to relax. Stragglers were driven on with blows. The sick and wounded were loaded onto wagons. Every evening we set up camp. This was a ritual practiced until it was automatic. First, scouts surveyed the area, choosing a suitable spot, a flat surface, preferably on a rise, close to water. Then the surveyors marked the perimeter, and the work began. Our contubernium, like all the others, grabbed tools and started digging. Around the perimeter of the future camp, we dug a deep ditch, throwing the earth inside to form a rampart. On the rampart, we set up a palisade of sharpened stakes that every soldier carried with him. In 2 or 3 hours, a real fortified camp arose with 4 gates, towers at the corners, and a strict interior layout. Only after this were we allowed to light fires and prepare dinner. We cooked barley porridge, chewed salted meat, and soaked hardtack in wine diluted with water. The food was simple but high in calories. A legionary needed energy. After dinner, guards were posted. The rest collapsed to sleep in their leather tents. The 8 men of the contubernium slept under one tent, pressed tightly together for warmth. In the morning, the camp was dismantled. We loaded everything onto ourselves again and moved on. And so it went every day, building and destroying, marching and digging in. This was the life of a legionary on campaign. After 2 weeks, we reached the Rhine. The wide, dark river separated civilization from the lands of the barbarians. On the other side began endless forests, full of dangers. We crossed on a pontoon bridge that the engineers had built in several days and entered enemy territory. The atmosphere changed immediately. Scouts reported traces of the enemy, burned villages, abandoned camps. The Germans knew we were coming and were preparing. Centurions became stricter. The guards were reinforced. At night, strange sounds were heard in the forest, either wolves or barbarian signals. Sleeping was difficult. Everyone was tense. The first contact with the enemy occurred on the 3rd day after the crossing. We were marching through a sparse forest when the advance patrol was attacked. Shouts and the clang of weapons were heard. The legion stopped instantly. The centurions roared commands. We quickly dropped our marching bags and formed up in battle order. Dense rows of shields, spears ready. Figures appeared at the edge of the forest. Germans, tall, long-haired, in furs and leather armor. There were about 200 of them, maybe more. They swung long swords and spears, shouting something in their language. Some beat their shields, creating a terrifying racket. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it would burst from my chest. My mouth was dry. My hands holding the shield and pilum were shaking. These were not wooden posts. These were living people who wanted to kill me, and I had to kill them. Centurion Severus walked along the line, his voice calm and cold. Hold the formation. Do not break the line. Wait for the command. First rank, pila ready. We raised our throwing spears. Titus stood in front of me. His broad back and armor seemed like a reliable defense. I was in the second rank, my shield covering his right. Next to me, Gnaeus breathed. His face was pale but determined. The barbarians moved forward, slowly at first, then faster. They ran, yelled, and shook their weapons. It seemed like they would sweep us away with one rush. The distance narrowed. 50 paces, 40, 30. "First rank, throw!" Severus roared. Hundreds of Pila soared into the air and crashed down onto the running Germans. I saw the heavy spears pierce shields and embed themselves in bodies. Barbarians fell, stumbling over their dead comrades, but the rest continued to run. "Second rank, throw!" I drew back and threw my pilum. The spear flew, spinning, and I saw it strike a German in the chest. He gasped, fell. I had killed a man. The first in my life. There was no time to think about it. The barbarians were very close now. The smell of their unwashed bodies, the shouts, the clang of metal. I drew my sword, pressed my shield against Titus. "Hold the line," Severus roared. The Germans crashed into our formation like a wave against a rock. The impact was monstrous. My shield shuddered from the force with which an enemy warrior slammed into it. I instinctively braced my feet, pushed the shield forward, and delivered a short, thrusting blow with my sword. The blade entered someone's body. I felt the resistance of flesh and bone. I pulled out the sword, struck again. Chaos was everywhere. The screams of the wounded and dying, the clash of swords against shields, the crack of breaking spears. It smelled of blood, sweat, and feces. That's what a real battle smells like. I struck and struck, not seeing the faces of the enemies, acting automatically. Next to me, Gnaeus fought, and someone behind me cried out in pain. Suddenly, I felt something hit my shield with such force that I staggered. A huge German leaned in with his full weight, trying to knock me down. His face was a few centimeters from mine, a beard, wild eyes, bared teeth. He slashed down with his sword, aiming for my head. I parried the blow with my shield and stabbed with a short thrust under his arm, where the armor plates separated. The sword went deep. The German gasped. His eyes widened in surprise. Warm blood splashed onto my arm. He fell. I had killed another person. This time I saw his eyes. The fight lasted an eternity, though in reality, it probably lasted no more than a half hour. The Germans couldn't break our line. They fought bravely, but we were trained, disciplined, and acted as a single organism. Every soldier defended not only himself, but also the comrade next to him. Our shields were a wall. Our swords were a sting. When the barbarians finally faltered and ran, we did not pursue them. We held the formation, as we were taught. Only the light cavalry chased the fleeing men, cutting down the stragglers. I dropped to my knees, breathing heavily. I was covered in others' blood and my own, though I had not received a scratch. My hands were shaking so hard that I could barely hold my sword. Next to me, Gnaeus was throwing up. Titus stood, leaning on his shield, his face gray. Then I heard a groan. I looked around and saw Publius, one of the brothers from our contubernium. He was lying on the ground, holding his side. Blood seeped between his fingers. We rushed to him. Marcius quickly cut his tunic and examined the wound. A long, deep slash on his side. An enemy sword had passed between the armor plates. Publius was wheezing. His face was deathly pale. "Medic! We need a medic!" Marcius yelled. A military doctor arrived with assistance. They quickly washed the wound with wine, applied a compress bandage, and gave Publius something for the pain to drink. He was carried away on a stretcher to the field hospital. We didn't know if he would survive. After the battle, we were allowed a short rest. We sat on the ground among the dead bodies, ours and the Germans. Medics walked the field, taking away the wounded, finishing off those who couldn't be saved. Looters searched the enemy corpses, taking weapons, jewelry, anything valuable. That evening we learned we had lost 30 men killed and about 100 wounded. More than 200 Germans had fallen. The victory was ours, but it didn't taste sweet. Publius, as it turned out later, survived. The doctors stitched the wound and stopped the bleeding, but he spent almost a month in the hospital. I couldn't sleep that night. I lay there staring into the darkness of the tent and again saw the faces of those I had killed, especially that large German who looked at me with surprise when my sword entered his body. Was he someone's father? Son? Did he have a family waiting for him at home? Marcius, as if reading my thoughts, quietly said, "Don't think about them, Marcus. They are the enemy. They would have killed you without hesitation. You did what you had to do. You defended yourself and your comrades. You fulfilled your duty." Maybe he was right, but it didn't make it any easier. The next day we moved on, towards the German settlements. We found several villages, burned them, and took provisions and livestock. There was almost no resistance. Most of the warriors had died in battle. Only old men, women, and children remained. They were driven into slavery. When we returned to the permanent camp on the border, I was already a different person. I had gone through battle. I had killed and seen death up close. I smelled it, heard its sounds. There were no more childish illusions about glory and heroism. War is dirt, blood, and death. But I survived. I stood firm in the line. I did not waver and did not run. I had become a true legionary. After several months of active combat operations, our legion was withdrawn to the border for permanent duty. We were stationed in a fort on the bank of the Rhine, one of dozens of fortifications stretched along the entire Roman border. The fort was built of stone and wood, surrounded by a high wall with towers. Inside were barracks, storerooms, stables, workshops, command headquarters, and a temple for the gods. Life here was very different from life on campaign. We no longer had to build camp every evening and break it down every morning. We had permanent bunks in the barracks, regular meals, and the ability to keep things in order. It seemed like it should be easier, but the routine of garrison duty proved to be its own unique test. The day began at dawn. The duty centurion roused us with a shout or blows from the vine staff. Army habits don't change. A quick breakfast, then formation on the parade ground. The commander read out the orders for the day, assigning tasks. Some were sent to guard duty on the walls, some to patrol along the border, and some to construction work. Guard duty was boring to the point of madness, standing on the wall for 4 hours, staring at the same forests across the river, looking out for enemies who appeared very rarely. Winter was especially hard, the piercing wind from the river, the cold, the snow. The only solace was that the relief came on time. We could go down, warm ourselves by the hearth, and drink hot wine. Patrols were more interesting, but more dangerous. A small group of soldiers would go outside the fort, inspect the surrounding area, and check the roads and villages of local tribes who were formerly allies of Rome. Sometimes we found traces of German scouts, sometimes gangs of deserters or bandits. Several times we engaged in short skirmishes, but nothing serious. Most of the time was spent on construction work. The Roman army was constantly building, repairing walls, laying roads, erecting bridges, and digging canals. A legionary was not only a warrior, but also an engineer, stonemason, and carpenter. We carried stones, mixed mortar, drove piles, and sawed logs. The work was hard and dirty, but it kept us in shape and gave us a sense of creation. We were literally building the empire with our own hands. Outside the fort, a small settlement gradually grew, a canaba, as such places were called. Merchants, craftsmen, women of questionable reputation, and retired soldiers settled there. Legionaries went there to spend their pay, and we received our pay regularly, 3 times a year, in gold and silver coins. True, the costs of equipment, food, clothing, and contributions to the burial fund were immediately deducted from the sum. not much remained in hand, but it was enough for an unmarried soldier. The first thing I did was send part of the money home. I found a merchant heading toward my town and sent a small bag of coins with him for my father. I knew the family needed that money. I spent the rest on myself, buying better food, new boots, and sometimes going to the tavern. The tavern was always noisy and crowded. Soldiers drank diluted wine, played dice, told stories, and boasted of feats. Gambling was popular, although officially forbidden. But commanders turned a blind eye to it, as long as it didn't lead to fights or major debts. I sometimes gambled too. I rarely won, but the process itself was addictive, distracting from the monotony of service. I met her in the Canaba. Her name was Astra, a local girl from a German tribe allied with Rome. She worked in the tavern, serving wine and food. Fair hair, blue eyes, a quiet voice. We started talking, casually at first, about trifles, then more. She spoke poor Latin. I didn't know German at all, but somehow we understood each other. Gradually, something developed between us. I started coming to the tavern more often, not for the wine, but for her. We walked along the riverbank in our free time. She showed me the surroundings, telling me about her tribe and customs. I told her about Rome, my family, and what I had seen on campaigns. After several months, we became close. Officially, I couldn't marry. Legionaries were forbidden to do so until the end of their service. But many soldiers lived with women in the Canaba, had children, and created something resembling a family. I did the same. Astra moved into a small room near the fort that I rented with my money. When I wasn't on duty, we spent time together. These were rare moments of happiness amid the monotonous military life. Returning after a hard day to a warm hearth, a hot dinner, and the soft hands of a woman, it was something simple and human that reminded me of life outside the army. But the army did not let go. Religious ceremonies were mandatory for all legionaries. We prayed to the gods before every campaign, made sacrifices on holidays, and participated in rituals in honor of the emperor and the legion's eagle. I was never particularly religious, but I performed the rites. To refuse meant incurring the wrath of commanders and comrades. Besides, in war, you start believing in the gods more strongly. When death walks nearby, you need something to hold on to. The cult of Mithras, the warrior god who defeated the bull, was especially popular among the soldiers. There was a small underground Mithraeum in the fort where many legionaries went. Secret ceremonies were held there, in which only the initiated could participate. I was also accepted into the cult. I went through the initiation, drank the sacred wine, and took the oath. These brethren in faith became another family, another support. In my 5th year of service, I was promoted. Centurion Severus, who had come to know me well by then, noticed that I was literate, disciplined, not a drunkard, and not a brawler. He appointed me as an immunis, exempted from heavy duties. Now I became a scribe in the century, keeping track of equipment, compiling lists, and recording orders. The work was physically easier, although it required attention and patience. This promotion caused envy among some comrades. One soldier, Marcus Cornelius, an arrogant fellow who always sought easy paths, openly said I was sucking up to the command. One day in the barracks, it almost came to a fight. He pushed me, calling me a flatterer. I shoved back. A scuffle broke out, but others intervened and pulled us apart. The centurion found out about the incident and flogged both of us, me for getting involved in the fight, him for starting it. "There is no place for personal grievances in the Legion," Severus said, bringing the vine staff down on my back. "You are brothers in arms, not market women." Every blow was a painful reminder that discipline was paramount. After that, I tried to stay out of conflicts. I performed my duties, interacted with those who treated me normally, and avoided those I disliked. The army teaches patience and humility, otherwise you won't survive. The years of garrison duty flowed slowly. Winters were replaced by springs, springs by summer, summer by autumn. Occasionally there were clashes with the Germans, but no major wars. We patrolled, built, guarded, drank, prayed to the gods, slept with women, and played dice. Life on the Empire's border was monotonous but relatively safe. I started getting used to this rhythm, almost forgetting that I had once dreamed of great battles and glory. But the Empire did not forget about us, and soon everything would change again. The order came suddenly, although rumors had been circulating for several weeks. A revolt in the Eastern Empire. Some tribe had rebelled, refused to pay tribute, and destroyed several auxiliary cohorts. The Emperor decided to teach them a lesson. Our legion, along with 3 others, was being sent to subdue the rebels. Mobilization began immediately. The fort turned into an anthill. Soldiers repaired equipment, sharpened weapons, and replenished supplies. Engineers assembled siege engines. Quartermasters formed supply trains. I, as the scribe, compiled lists, checking that everything was ready. I worked deep into the night, filling wax tablets with the names of soldiers, the quantity of swords, shields, spears, nails, ropes, and wagons. Saying goodbye to Astra was difficult. She cried, holding my hand. I couldn't promise that I would return. In war, no one can promise that. I left her all my savings, telling her that if I didn't return in a year, she should consider me dead and arrange her life. She shook her head, saying she would wait. I don't know if I believed her then. I don't know if I believed myself. The march to the east took 3 months. We covered hundreds of kilometers, across plains, forests, and mountain passes. The mountain crossing was especially difficult. Narrow trails, steep climbs, thin air. Wagons had to be dismantled and carried piece by piece. Mules fell into the abysses along with their cargo. At night in the mountains, it was so cold that the water in our skins froze. Several soldiers died from exhaustion and mountain sickness. They were buried right by the road, their graves marked with simple stones. The rest marched on. A legion does not stop because of a few deaths. Such is the iron logic of war. When we finally descended from the mountains and reached the plain, the rebel city stood before us. Large, well-fortified, with high stone walls and towers. Thousands of warriors were sheltering behind these walls, ready to defend to the last. Taking such a city by storm meant paying in blood. The legate ordered the siege to begin. We set up camp at a safe distance from the walls, surrounding the city on all sides, blocking the roads. No one was to enter or leave. Hunger is the best ally of the besiegers. But no one planned to wait months for the defenders to surrender from starvation. Engineers began constructing siege engines. I saw for the first time how these monstrous devices were built. Huge towers on wheels, taller than the city walls, with platforms for archers and assault groups. Battering rams, massive logs with metal heads, suspended on chains under a roof for protection from arrows. Catapults and ballistae, capable of launching stones and enormous arrows. All of this was done by the legionaries, sawing, planing, nailing, and tying. I, exempt from heavy duties, helped the engineers with calculations and blueprints. It was amazing how much mathematics was required to build a machine for killing people. The siege began after 2 weeks. Catapults and ballistae opened fire on the walls, trying to breach them. Stones weighing tens of kilograms flew, hitting the stonework, chipping off pieces. The defenders retaliated, shooting arrows from bows, throwing darts, dropping stones on the heads of those approaching. Then the siege towers moved. Slowly, creakingly, hundreds of soldiers pushed them forward. I was in one of the assault groups, 20 men who were supposed to be the first to rush onto the wall. This was an honorable but deadly dangerous task. The first always suffer the highest casualties. We climbed to the upper tier of the tower. Planks creaked under our feet. The entire structure swayed as it moved. Ahead, the city wall approached, teeming with defenders. They threw torches, trying to set the tower on fire, and shot arrows from bows. Arrows rattled against the wooden shields covering the tower. When the tower was close, the assault bridge was lowered. It slammed down onto the edge of the wall with a crash. "Forward! For Rome!" the centurion roared, and we rushed across the bridge. What began next is impossible to describe in words. Chaos, shouts, the clang of weapons. I ran, swinging my sword, clashing with enemy warriors. The defenders fought desperately. This was their land, their homes, their families behind them. They threw us from the wall, stabbed us with spears, and cut us down with swords. I fought like a man possessed, slashing, thrusting, pushing with my shield. I saw Titus, my old comrade, fall nearby. A spear had pierced his neck. I saw another legionary fall down, inside the city, and crash to his death. Suddenly, I felt a sharp pain in my shoulder. I turned. An arrow was sticking out of my body, having pierced the edge of my armor. The pain was so sharp that for a moment, I lost my bearings. A warrior with a sword took advantage of this, swinging at me. I instinctively raised my shield, deflected the blow, and blindly thrust my sword. I connected. The enemy fell. Blood flowed down my arm. My strength was draining away. I staggered, retreating toward the edge of the wall. One of my comrades grabbed me, pulling me back toward the tower. I only vaguely remember the descent, the hands carrying me, the voices. Then, darkness. I woke up in the field hospital. I was lying on a hard bunk in a large tent, surrounded by the groans of the wounded. It smelled of blood, medicine, and urine. A military doctor leaned over me, an elderly Greek who had served in the legions for 20 years. "You were lucky, Legionary," he said. "The arrow didn't hit the bone. It passed through the muscle. We took it out, washed it with wine, and cauterized it. It will hurt, but you'll keep your arm." He wasn't lying. The pain was monstrous, especially when they changed my bandages, washing the wound with vinegar. I gritted my teeth to keep from screaming. Other wounded lay around, who was with a severed arm, who was with a pierced stomach. Those who couldn't be saved were carried to a separate tent, where they quietly died. I spent 10 days in the hospital. During that time, the city fell. The legionaries breached the wall with a ram, rushed inside, and carried out a slaughter. The rebels were cut down. Women and children were driven into slavery. The city was plundered and partially burned. Such is the price of rebellion against Rome. When I could walk, the legate summoned me. All the surviving assault troops were lined up, about 10 of us remaining out of 20. The legate gave a speech about valor and loyalty, then began handing out awards. I was given Fallery, metal medallions worn on the chest as a mark of distinction. This was an honor to be proud of. I accepted the award, but I felt no particular joy. Too many comrades remained on the walls of that city. After the city fell, there was another ceremony, the execution of deserters. During the siege, several soldiers tried to run away, unable to endure the hardship and danger. They were caught and were now to be executed publicly, as a warning to the rest. The entire legion was lined up. The bound deserters were brought forward, 5 miserable men, pale with fear. The verdict was read. Then legionaries from their own centuries stoned them to death. This was an ancient execution. Comrades kill a traitor, washing the shame from the unit. I stood in formation and watched. I didn't want to look, but I had to. Everyone had to. This was the lesson. Treason is punishable by death, and there will be no mercy. The empire is cruel but fair according to its own laws. We spent the winter in the captured province. We were quartered in the cities and villages that had survived. The local population feared and hated us. We were conquerors, murderers of their kinsmen, but they no longer dared to resist. Those months were strange. The war was over, but peace was not felt. I lived in a requisitioned house, ate at a stranger's table, and slept in a stranger's bed. I thought of home, family, and Astra. I wrote letters that might never arrive. I counted the years of service, 9 behind, 16 ahead, more than half my life still in the army. Fatigue settled heavily upon me. Fatigue from the blood, the deaths, the endless marches and battles. I was no longer the boy who dreamed of glory. I was a soldier who had seen too much, lost too many. The scars on my body healed, but the scars on my soul remained. But the service continued, and I continued to serve because there was no other choice. In the 13th year of service, I was promoted to Tesserarius, assistant centurion. This was a significant advancement, especially for a simple soldier without connections or wealthy relatives. Centurion Severus, who by then had grayed and acquired new scars, personally announced the appointment to me. "Marcus Valerius, you have been through much," he said, looking me in the eyes. "I saw you as a recruit, saw you in battle, and I know you are literate and not stupid. Now you will be my right hand. You will oversee order, keep records, and train the young ones. Can you handle it?" I nodded. "I can handle it. I must handle it." The new position meant more responsibility, but also more privileges. My pay doubled. I received a separate room in the barracks and exemption from guards and patrols. But in return, the entire administrative work of the century fell on my shoulders. 100 men who needed to be supplied, organized, and checked. Every morning I compiled lists: who was on guard, who was on work duty, who was on patrol. I checked the condition of weapons and equipment, ensured that the soldiers kept the barracks clean, and settled minor conflicts between them. When the centurion was busy or absent, I commanded the sentry in his place. A lot of time was spent on training recruits. Every year, young green boys arrived, just like I once was. I looked at them and saw myself 15 years earlier. The same burning eyes, the same illusions of glory. My job was to turn these boys into soldiers without completely breaking them. I taught them as I had been taught, strictly but fairly. I showed the correct stance with the sword and shield, explained how to hold the formation, and how to obey orders without hesitation. I beat them for mistakes, praised them for successes. Some looked at me with hatred, some with respect. I understood both. The main thing was, they became legionaries. Between campaigns and training, the Legion participated in massive construction projects. The Empire did not just conquer territories, it developed them, connected them with roads, supplied them with water, and turned barbarian lands into civilized provinces. I participated in building a bridge across a wide river. Engineers designed it. We executed it. We drove piles into the riverbed, laid stone supports, and constructed arches. The work required precision and coordination. One mistake, and the entire structure could collapse. When the bridge was completed, and the first wagon drove across it, I felt pride. This bridge would stand for centuries, and I had a hand in it. Then there was a road, straight, paved with stone, cutting through hills and forests. We cleared the land, leveled the surface, and laid layers of gravel and stone. A Roman road is not just a path. It is an engineering marvel, allowing legions to move quickly in any weather. There were also aqueducts, stone arches carrying water to cities. To see water flowing through a channel dozens of meters above the ground was astonishing. We were literally building the empire with our own hands, stone by stone. All this time, I was saving money. I set aside almost all my pay, denying myself unnecessary expenses. I didn't gamble, rarely went to the tavern, and only bought necessities. I kept the money in a special iron chest that I held under lock and key. By the end of the 15th year of service, a decent sum had accumulated, enough to buy a small plot of land and build a house after retirement. I regularly wrote letters home. The process was long and expensive, hiring a scribe if I didn't have time myself, buying wax tablets, finding a reliable messenger. But the connection with my family was important. Father wrote that things were going well, my money helped, and my younger brothers had grown up. One went into trade, the other into craftsmanship. Mother was still praying for my return. The news of my grandfather's death arrived in the 16th year of service. The letter was short. He died in his sleep, quietly, without suffering. He was buried with honors, as befitting a veteran. I didn't cry when I read those lines. I had seen too many deaths to cry. But something tightened inside. Grandfather was a link to the past, to the boy who dreamed of the legions. Now that link was severed. During those years, I delved deeper into the cult of Mithras. The underground temple became a refuge where I could find peace and brotherhood. Mithras was the god of warriors. He fought the forces of darkness, triumphed, and brought light. His followers believed in the immortality of the soul, in a reward after death for the brave. This faith gave me strength. I passed all the degrees of initiation and became one of the elders in the community. I participated in secret rituals, sharing the sacred meal, drinking wine as the blood of the bull Mithras killed, listening to hymns. These people, my brothers in the cult, understood me without words. We had all seen death, all carried the burden of service, all sought meaning. More and more often, I thought about life after the army. 7 more years of service, then freedom. What would I do? I would buy land somewhere in a veterans colony, build a house, and start a farm. Perhaps I would marry, if Astra was still waiting, though the chances of that were slim. Perhaps I would find another. I would grow grapes or olives, sell them at the market, and live a quiet, measured life. Sometimes these thoughts seemed like impossible dreams. How could one live a peaceful life after 25 years of war? How could I forget the faces of the killed, the screams of the wounded, the smell of blood? Would I even be able to live without orders, without formation, without comrades nearby? The last campaigns were not so difficult. Experience had done its work. I knew how to conserve strength on the march, how to avoid unnecessary risks in battle, how to survive under any conditions. The battles were the same: barbarians on the borders, minor revolts, bandits. Nothing special, just work. But my body was no longer the same. Old wounds ached in the cold and before rain. The shoulder pierced by the arrow hurt at night. My knees cracked after long marches. My teeth began to decay from rough food. My hair was graying. I was not yet old, in my 30s, but I looked older. War ages you quickly. Diseases also became frequent companions. A fever I caught in one of the marshy camps returned again and again, forcing me to lie down with a high temperature for weeks. A cough that wouldn't go away for months. Stomach pains from spoiled food and dirty water. The military doctor treated me as best he could, but some things couldn't be cured. Nevertheless, I held on. I performed the duties of Tesserarius, commanded, trained, and built. The Legion was my life, the only thing I truly knew. My comrades were my family, although most of those with whom I started service were already dead or demobilized. I became what I was destined to be, an experienced, hardened soldier of Rome. Not young, but still strong, tired, but not broken. With every day, retirement approached, and with every day, the hope grew that I would live to see it and finally find peace. The 25th year of service was drawing to a close. I had survived. Out of the 100 recruits who took the oath with me, only a few lived to see retirement. The rest fell in battles, died of disease, perished in accidents, or simply vanished without a trace. But I survived, went through everything, and now stood on the threshold of freedom. The retirement ceremony was solemn. There were about 30 of us veterans being demobilized from the entire Legion. We were lined up in full dress uniform in front of the headquarters. The legate gave a speech about faithful service, valor, and how the empire was grateful to its defenders. The words were beautiful, but I listened distractedly, thinking about what would happen next. Then they started calling names. When my name was called, I stepped forward. The scribe handed me 2 bronze tablets clamped together, the official discharge diploma. All the information was engraved on the tablets: my name, the name of the legion, the years of service, and confirmation of Roman citizenship for me and my future children. This document was worth more than gold. It proved that I had served honorably, that I was a veteran entitled to privileges. With it, I could receive land, exemption from certain taxes, and respect in any part of the empire. Along with the diploma, I was handed a monetary reward, a sack of gold and silver coins. The amount was substantial. Combined with my savings, it allowed me to start a new life without want. Some veterans chose a land grant in one of the colonies instead of money, but I decided differently. I would take the money and choose the place myself. After the ceremony, there was a feast. The Legion treated the demobilized men: meat, good wine, bread. We sat at long tables recalling campaigns, comrades, and battles. We laughed and were sad at the same time. This was the end of an entire era of life. Saying goodbye to my comrades was difficult. Marcius, my old friend from the Contubernium, had 1 more year to serve. He had joined the service later than me. We embraced, and he simply said, "Take care, brother. Build a good house, have children, live for those who didn't make it." I nodded, not trusting my voice. I remembered everyone who had died: Titus, Publius, dozens of others. They remained on the battlefields, in foreign lands. Their graves were lost. But I was alive, retiring, getting a chance at a normal life. Why did I survive, and they didn't? Chance? The will of the gods? There was no answer. The next day, I left the camp. I took off my military gear and put on a simple traveler's tunic. I took my sack of belongings, documents, and money. I glanced back at the fort gates where I had spent so many years and started on my way. I decided to settle in a veterans colony near the border, in the lands that our legion had once conquered. Hundreds of former soldiers had already moved there. Good land could be bought cheaply there. The journey took several weeks. I was not in a hurry. For the first time in 25 years, no one was driving me to march. No one was shouting commands. The colony greeted me with quiet and order. Straight streets, new houses, fields all around. The local inhabitants, former legionaries and their families. Everyone here spoke the same language, understood each other without words. Here, I could start anew. I bought a plot of land on the outskirts, small, but enough for a farm. I hired local workers and started building a house. I applied the skills gained in the legions. I knew how to plan, organize, and work with stone and wood. The house turned out sturdy, simple, with thick walls and a reliable roof. While the construction was underway, I met a neighbor, the widow of a veteran who had died a year ago. Her name was Julia. She was a local native, the daughter of a Roman merchant. Not young, but strong, intelligent, and resourceful. We started talking, casually at first, then helping each other, then something more. I never found Astra. I tried to ask about her when I passed the old fort, but no one remembered the girl from the tavern. Most likely she had married long ago or left. So many years had passed, it was foolish to hope. With Julia, it was different. No romance, like in youth, but something stable, reliable. We were both middle-aged, both had seen life, both sought peace. We married without much ceremony. We simply agreed to live together and run a joint household. Setting up the farm was slow but steady. I planted a vineyard, small, but it would yield a harvest in a few years. I got a few goats, chickens, and bought a mule for field work. Julia started a garden where vegetables and herbs grew. Life was simple, measured, and unusually quiet after the roar of war. Military skills came in handy unexpectedly. When the colony began building public baths, I was asked to help with the planning. After all, I had participated in building similar structures during my service. When a local militia was formed to protect against bandits, I was chosen as the commander. Who knows better how to organize a defense than an experienced legionary? Gradually, I was elected to the colony council, the local governing body. We settled disputes between residents, planned the construction of roads and fortifications, and distributed taxes. It turned out that the administrative experience of a tesserarius was very useful in peaceful life. I was 43 years old. Half a lifetime behind me, maybe more. My body ached from old wounds but held up. My soul was tired but not dead. I found my place, a small house, a plot of land, a wife nearby, the respect of neighbors. Sometimes at night, dreams visited me. The faces of the killed, the screams of the wounded, the clash of swords. I would wake up in a cold sweat, and Julia would silently embrace me until the trembling passed. She never asked about the war, and I was grateful for that silence. I was free. After 25 years of service, thousands of kilometers marched, and dozens of battles, I finally found peace. This was not the glory the boy had once dreamed of. This was something simpler and more valuable, the right simply to live. 15 years had passed since my retirement. I was 58, an age few reached in those times. Most of my comrades from the Legion were long since in the grave. I continued to live, although my body no longer obeyed as before. I managed the farm as before, but the heavy work was done by hired workers, young local men. I mostly supervised, planned, and monitored. The vineyard brought a good income. I sold wine to merchants. We kept goats and chickens for ourselves. We lived modestly, but without need. Julia bore me 2 children, a son and a daughter. Late children, but sturdy and healthy. My son took after his father, tall, broad-shouldered, with a penchant for order and discipline. When he turned 18, he also joined the legions. I did not try to dissuade him. I understood that military blood passes down. I only gave him a few pieces of advice based on experience. He listened carefully, memorizing every word. My daughter married the son of a veteran neighbor and gave birth to 3 grandchildren. When they were small, they would run to me and I would tell them stories. Not about blood and the horrors of war. They were too young for that. I told them about the distant lands I had seen, about the German forests and eastern deserts, about great cities and mighty rivers, about how the legionaries built bridges and roads, about battlefield brotherhood and loyalty. The grandchildren listened, eyes wide open. The eldest grandson especially loved these stories. He would run his finger over the scars on my hands and ask, "Grandfather, tell me how you got this one." And I would tell him, softening the truth, turning it into a heroic fairy tale. Sometimes I met with other veterans of the colony. We sat on a bench near the forum, drank diluted wine, and reminisced. These men understood me without words. We had gone through the same things, seen the same things. With them, there was no need to explain why one sometimes woke up at night in a cold sweat, why one flinched at a loud sound, why one disliked crowds. There were fewer and fewer of us. Every year, someone died, from old age, illness, or old wounds that made themselves known decades later. We buried them with military honors, and we, the survivors, stood by the grave, giving a final salute to our comrade. The local community treated me with respect. I was a council member. People came to me for advice on disputes. Young men asked me to teach them military arts. The status of a veteran meant a lot. I was a man who served the empire, defended its borders, and built its future. In my final years, old age descended heavily. Wounds received decades ago constantly ached. The shoulder pierced by the arrow could barely be raised. My knees refused to bend after a long walk. The cough I caught in the damp German forests returned and never left. The fever came more and more frequently, leaving me weak and exhausted. Julia cared for me patiently. She prepared soft food that I could chew with my sore teeth, gave me herbal teas for the pain, and covered me with warm blankets when I was shaking. My children and grandchildren visited often, but I saw in their eyes what I didn't want to see, the understanding that the end was near. I wrote my will. I called a scribe and dictated my last wishes. I left the house and land to my son if he returned from service. If not, everything passed to my daughter. Part of the money was set aside for a dignified funeral, part for a tombstone. I wanted to be remembered. Death came quietly on a winter night. I lay in my bed surrounded by family. Breathing became more difficult. My strength was draining away. Julia held my hand. My daughter wept softly. The grandchildren stood by the doorway, frightened and quiet. Images flashed before my eyes. My childhood home, my father's face, training with my grandfather, the oath before the standards, the first battle, the faces of my comrades, living and dead. My whole life passed in an instant. I had lived honorably, served faithfully, lived to old age and saw my grandchildren. What more could one wish for? My last thought was, Mithras, receive me. I was buried with military honors. The local militia, which I had once trained, formed a guard of honor. The veterans of the colony came to send off their comrade. A bugle played the farewell melody, the same one played at the funerals of legionaries. The coffin was carried on shoulders, covered with a red cloak, a symbol of service. The head of the colony council spoke at the funeral. He talked about my service, about how I was an example for the young, a pillar of the community, a loyal son of Rome. The words were sincere. I had earned this praise with blood and years of service. A simple but dignified tombstone was erected, a stone stele with the inscription carved, Marcus Valerius Maximus, veteran of the legions who served 25 years, an honest soldier, a faithful comrade, a loving father, here rests his dust. Below were listed the campaigns and battles in which I had participated. Memory of me lived on in the family. The grandchildren grew up listening to stories about their great-grandfather, the Legionary. My son returned from service, received his discharge, and settled in the house I built. He told his children about the man I was, what I taught, and what I valued. The colony remembered me as one of its founders, a man who helped build the community. Other veterans remembered a comrade who went through fire and water with them. Thus ended the life of a Roman legionary, from birth in a humble family to the death of a respected veteran. A life filled with hardship and blood, but lived with dignity. A life that was part of something greater, a great empire that stood for centuries. I was one of millions who held this empire on their shoulders, an ordinary soldier whose name would not go down in history. But without men like me, there would be neither an empire nor its glory. This was my life, the life of a legionary of Rome.